In the brutal outskirts of a dust-choked frontier town, a lone cowboy named Ethan Cross stood before a snarling puppy everyone else had given up on, vicious, half-starved, and marked for death. For a single coin, he bought what the town called a mistake. They laughed. They warned him. They said some things were born broken and couldn't be fixed. But Ethan saw something they didn't, fear hiding beneath all that rage. He'd spent years running from his own ghosts, and maybe, just maybe, saving this animal meant saving something in himself too. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this tale travels. The sun beat down on Copper Ridge like a hammer on an anvil, turning the dirt streets into something close to powder. Ethan Cross wiped the back of his neck with a bandana that had gone from blue to gray months ago and squinted at the crowd gathered near the livery stable. Wasn't often you saw that many people bunched together in the middle of a Thursday afternoon, which meant either someone had died or someone was about to. He kept walking, leading his horse by the reins, not particularly interested in either scenario. But then he heard the growling. Not the kind that came from a full-grown dog protecting territory. This was higher-pitched, desperate, the sound of something small trying to convince the world it was dangerous. Ethan slowed. The crowd shifted, and he caught a glimpse of a wooden crate in the center, and inside it, a puppy that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts, mismatched colors, ribs showing through patchy fur, ears too big for its head. $5 to whoever takes this demon off my hands. The voice belonged to Sal Drucker, a freighter who ran goods between Copper Ridge and the mining camps up north. He was a thick man with a beard that grew in 3 different directions, and right now he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I'm serious, $5 and he's yours. Hell, I'll pay you if you can get him out of my sight. The crowd laughed, but it wasn't the warm kind of laughter. It had edges. Ethan moved closer, careful not to spook his mare. The puppy in the crate couldn't have been more than 4 months old, but it was throwing itself against the wooden slats like a creature 3 times its size, teeth bared, eyes wild. Every few seconds it would slam into the side hard enough that the whole crate rocked. "What's wrong with it?" someone called out. "What's right with it?" Sal shot back. "Damn thing tried to take my finger off this morning, nearly bit clean through the glove. I found him 2 weeks back, thought I'd make a few bucks selling him as a cattle dog, but he's got no sense in him. Just rage. Pure, stupid rage." "Should just shoot it," another voice said. This one came from a man Ethan didn't recognize, someone passing through. "Save everyone the trouble." A few people nodded. The puppy kept snarling, kept throwing itself at the walls of its prison. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Not pity, exactly. Something closer to recognition. He stepped forward, the crowd parting without much thought. Up close, the puppy looked worse. One ear had a chunk missing, and there were scars along its muzzle that didn't come from play. Someone had hurt this animal, hurt it bad, and hurt it early. "How much you really want for him?" Ethan asked. Sal blinked, surprised to see someone taking him seriously. "You deaf? I just said 5 to—" "I got $1, Ethan interrupted. "Take it or don't." The crowd went quiet. Sal stared at him like he'd just offered to buy a rattlesnake. "You're joking." "I'm not." Ethan pulled a silver dollar from his pocket and held it up. It caught the light, flashing once before he tossed it to Sal, who caught it on instinct. Crate, too. "Mister, you got any idea what you're buying?" Sal looked genuinely concerned now, which was almost funny. "That thing'll kill you in your sleep. I've seen wild dogs with better temperaments." "Then I guess you're getting a good deal." Ethan bent down and gripped the crate by its corners. The puppy immediately lunged at his hands, snapping at the gaps between the wood. Ethan didn't flinch. "Thanks for the business." He lifted the crate, turned, and started walking back toward where his mare stood tied. Behind him, the crowd erupted into murmurs. "He's out of his damn mind. Give it 3 days. He'll be back asking for his $1. If he's got all his fingers left." Ethan kept walking. The puppy kept growling, a constant low rumble that didn't stop even when Ethan tied the crate to the back of his saddle and mounted up. The mare didn't like it much. Her ears flicked back and she sidestepped twice, but she'd been with Ethan long enough to trust his judgment, even when it looked questionable. They rode out of town slow, the puppies snarling fading into the background noise of Copper Ridge, The clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the creak of the saloon doors, the endless wind that never quite stopped blowing. Ethan's ranch sat 5 miles west of town, tucked into a shallow valley where the scrub grass gave way to a few struggling cottonwoods and a creek that ran 3 months out of the year if you were lucky. The house was small, one room with a loft, built by someone who'd had bigger dreams than Ethan did. The barn was in better shape than the house, which said something about priorities. He dismounted, untied the crate, and carried it into the barn. The puppy had gone quiet during the ride, but the second Ethan set the crate down, the snarling started up again. He left it there, went back outside, and spent the next 20 minutes unsaddling the mare and making sure she had water and feed. When he finally returned to the barn, the puppy was panting, exhausted from its own fury. Ethan crouched down a few feet away from the crate and just watched. The animal stared back, sides heaving, lips pulled back to show teeth that were still too small to do much damage. But it would grow, and if nothing changed, those teeth would get bigger, and the rage would get worse, and eventually someone would put a bullet in it, because that's what you did with animals that couldn't be trusted. "You got a name?" Ethan asked quietly. The puppy growled. "Didn't think so." Ethan sat down fully, crossing his legs. The dirt floor of the barn was cool, almost pleasant after the heat outside. "Saw a dog once, down in Texas, burned in a grass fire. Someone pulled him out, and he lived, but his coat never grew back right, all patchy and red in places. They called him Blaze." He paused. "You got that same kind of look, so I guess that's what I'll call you." Blaze, if that's what he was now, didn't seem impressed. He lunged at the crate again, claws scrabbling against wood. Ethan didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't do anything except sit there and breathe. After a while, Blaze stopped lunging. He didn't calm down exactly, but he stopped wasting energy. His eyes never left Ethan's face. "I'm not going to hurt you," Ethan said. "I know you don't believe that, but it's true." He stood up slowly, went to the corner of the barn where he kept a few supplies, and filled a shallow bowl with water from a bucket. He brought it back and slid it between the slats of the crate. Blaze immediately knocked it over, water spilling across the dirt. Ethan refilled it, slid it back in. This time, Blaze just stared at it, suspicious. "It's going to be there whether you drink it or not," Ethan said. Then he turned and walked out of the barn, closing the door behind him. That night, Ethan ate a cold supper on the porch, leftover beans, a piece of hardtack that could have doubled as a roof shingle, and listened to the sounds coming from the barn. Blaze hadn't stopped growling, but it was quieter now, less frantic, just a low, constant reminder that he was still in there, still fighting. Ethan thought about the crowd in town, the way they'd looked at the puppy like it was already dead. He thought about Sal's face when he'd taken the dollar, that mix of relief and pity, like he'd just unloaded a problem onto someone too stupid to see it coming. Maybe he was right. Ethan had bought the ranch 3 years ago, with money he'd saved working cattle drives and doing odd jobs across half the territory. It wasn't much, but it was his. The plan had been to build something. Exactly what? He wasn't sure. A life, maybe. Something that didn't involve moving every few months, sleeping on the ground, waking up in places that all looked the same. But plans had a way of falling apart. The creek dried up more often than it ran. The cattle he'd bought died in a hard winter. And the silence, the kind that came from living alone in a place where your nearest neighbor was an hour's ride away, turned out to be louder than he'd expected. He'd thought about leaving, selling the place, moving on. But where would he go? What would he do? He was 32 years old, and the only thing he knew how to do was survive. And that was getting harder every year. So he stayed, fixed what broke, planted things that didn't grow, and tried not to think too hard about what came next. Then today, he'd seen that puppy in the crate, and something in him had shifted. Not hope exactly, more like recognition, like looking in a mirror and seeing something you'd forgotten was there. He finished his supper, rinsed the plate with water from the rain barrel, and went inside. The house was dark except for the single lamp he kept burning on the table. He sat down in the chair by the window and stared out at the barn. The growling had stopped. The next morning, Ethan found the water bowl empty. Blaze was curled in the corner of the crate, as far from the door as he could get, watching Ethan with eyes that didn't blink. "Morning," Ethan said. Blaze's lip curled. Ethan refilled the water, added a handful of dried meat to a second bowl, and slid both into the crate. Then he sat down in the same spot as the day before and waited. Blaze didn't eat, didn't drink, just stared. "Suit yourself, sir," Ethan said after a while. He stood, brushed the dust off his pants, and headed out to deal with the fence line that had come down during the last storm. When he came back that afternoon, the meat was gone and the water bowl was empty again. Blaze was in the same corner, watching. Ethan smiled, just a little. "Progress," he muttered. The days fell into a rhythm. Every morning, Ethan brought food and water. Every morning, Blaze growled and snapped and made it clear he wanted nothing to do with this arrangement. And every afternoon when Ethan came back, the bowls were empty. On the fourth day, Ethan opened the crate. Blaze didn't bolt. He pressed himself into the corner, hackles raised, eyes locked on Ethan like he was waiting for the trap to spring. "You can leave whenever you want," Ethan said. "Door's open." He left the barn and went back to the house. An hour later, he checked. Blaze was still in the crate. 2 hours after that, he was gone. Ethan found him behind the barn, crouched low in the tall grass, looking half wild and fully uncertain. When Ethan stepped into view, Blaze bolted, not toward the open country, but back into the barn. Ethan followed slowly. Blaze was in the crate again, panting. "It's all right," Ethan said quietly. "You're safe here. I know you don't believe it yet, but you will." A week passed, then 2. Blaze started spending more time outside the crate, though he never let Ethan get close. He'd watch from a distance, ears swiveling at every sound, ready to run at the first sign of danger. Ethan didn't push. He went about his work, fixing the fence, clearing brush, hauling water, and let Blaze decide what felt safe. Slowly, the distance between them shrank. 10 feet became 8. 8 became 5. On the 16th day, Blaze ate from Ethan's hand. It wasn't graceful. He snatched the meat so fast he nearly took a finger with it, then retreated to the far side of the barn. But he didn't run outside. And when Ethan sat down, Blaze stayed. "See?" Ethan said. "Told you." Blaze chewed, eyes wary, but his tail moved. Just once. A single, uncertain wag. The first time Ethan rode into town with Blaze, people stared. It was a Saturday, and Copper Ridge was busier than usual. Farmers selling produce, miners restocking supplies, kids running wild between the buildings. Ethan tied his mare outside the general store and turned to find half the street watching him. Blaze sat at his feet, still too thin but no longer skeletal, his coat starting to fill in with patches of red and brown and black. He wasn't growling, wasn't lunging. He was just sitting, calm, looking at the world with something that wasn't quite trust but wasn't pure fear either. "I'll be damned," someone muttered. Sal Drucker appeared from the feed store, stopping dead when he saw them. "That the same dog?" "Same dog," Ethan confirmed. "How the hell?" Sal shook his head. "I wouldn't have believed it if I wasn't seeing it." "Turns out he just needed time," Ethan said. "And someone who wasn't scared of him." Sal looked at Blaze, then at Ethan, then back at Blaze. "Well, I'll be damned," he said again, and walked off muttering to himself. Ethan bought what he needed: flour, coffee, a new axe handle, and headed back outside. Blaze was exactly where he'd left him, though a small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance. "He bite?" a kid asked, maybe 10 years old, all freckles and curiosity. "Not anymore," Ethan said. "But don't touch him without asking." The kid nodded solemnly and walked away. Ethan mounted up, and Blaze fell into step beside the mare, matching her pace like he'd been doing it his whole life. They rode out of town together, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like maybe he'd done something right. The rattlesnake came out of nowhere. Ethan was working on the fence line, stringing new wire where the old had rusted through, when he heard the rattle. It was a sound you learned to recognize fast if you wanted to stay alive out here. Dry, urgent, unmistakable. He froze. Looked down. The snake was coiled 2 feet from his boot, head raised, tongue flicking. Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe, just held perfectly still and started calculating how fast he could step back without triggering a strike. Then Blaze was there. He came out of the tall grass like a flash of fire, barking, not the high-pitched yapping of a small dog, but something deeper, almost a roar. The snake's head swiveled toward the noise, and in that half-second of distraction, Ethan threw himself backward. Blaze lunged. The snake struck. Ethan saw it happen in the kind of slow motion that only comes when your brain knows something terrible is unfolding and can't do a damn thing to stop it. Blaze twisted midair, teeth snapping, and the snake's fangs sank into his shoulder instead of Ethan's leg. The dog yelped, sharp, pained, but he didn't let go. He shook his head violently, flinging the snake into the grass. It landed in a coil, stunned, and Ethan was on it with the axe before it could recover, bringing the blade down hard enough to cut clean through. He dropped the axe and turned to Blaze. The dog was on his side, panting, blood seeping from the wound where the fangs had gone in. His eyes found Ethan's, and in them was something Ethan hadn't seen before. Not fear, not rage, but something simpler. Trust. "No," Ethan breathed. "No, no, no." He scooped Blaze up, cradling him against his chest, and ran for the house. The dog was heavier than he looked, all muscle under that patchy coat, but Ethan didn't feel the weight. He kicked the door open, laid Blaze on the table, and grabbed the knife from the shelf. Snakebite. He'd seen men die from them, and he'd seen men survive. The difference usually came down to how fast you acted. He found the puncture wounds, 2 perfect holes in the meat of Blaze's shoulder, and made a small cut across them with the knife. Blood welled up, dark and thick. Ethan pressed down on the wound, forcing more blood out, trying to get as much venom out as he could. Blaze whimpered but didn't fight. His breathing was fast, shallow. "Stay with me," Ethan said. His voice came out rough, almost angry. "You hear me? You don't get to do this. You don't get to save me, and then just... He couldn't finish. He kept pressure on the wound, counting seconds in his head, trying to remember everything he'd ever learned about treating snake bites. Elevate the limb. Keep the victim calm. Watch for swelling. Blaze's eyes started to close. "No!" Ethan grabbed his face, shaking him gently. "You stay awake. Look at me. Come on, Blaze, look at me." The dog's eyes opened, just slits. Ethan wrapped the wound as tight as he dared with strips torn from an old shirt, then sat down on the floor with Blaze's head in his lap. He stroked the dog's ears, the one good one and the torn one, and talked. Just talked, about nothing and everything, filling the silence with the sound of his voice because it was the only thing he could think to do. "First dog I ever had, I was 8 years old," he said. "Found him on the side of the road, half-starved, no collar. My father said we couldn't keep him. We didn't have the money, but I hid him in the barn anyway, fed him scraps, called him Rufus." He laughed, but it came out wet. "That dog followed me everywhere. Slept at the foot of my bed every night for 6 years. Then one winter he just didn't wake up. Old age, my mother said. I cried for a week." Blaze's breathing was steadier now, still fast, but not panicked. "You're not dying on me," Ethan said. "I won't let you." The night was long. Ethan didn't sleep. He kept watch, checking Blaze's breathing, feeling for fever, making sure the swelling didn't get worse. Somewhere around midnight, the dog's eyes opened fully, and he licked Ethan's hand once before closing them again. By morning, the worst had passed. Blaze was weak, barely able to stand, but he was alive. Ethan carried him outside and laid him in a patch of sunlight near the porch. The dog settled with a sigh, resting his head on his paws. "You're an idiot," Ethan told him. "A brave, stupid idiot." Blaze's tail thumped twice against the ground. Ethan sat down beside him and stared out at the horizon. The sun was coming up, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The wind was picking up, carrying the smell of dust and distant rain. He thought about the rattlesnake, about how close he'd come, about how Blaze hadn't hesitated, hadn't thought twice, had just moved because that's what you did when someone you cared about was in danger. "I don't deserve you," Ethan said quietly. Blaze didn't answer. He just lay there in the sun, breathing steady, alive. And for the first time since he'd bought this piece of land, Ethan felt like maybe he'd found what he was looking for. Blaze recovered slowly, limping for the first week, favoring his right side where the snake had gotten him. Ethan changed the bandage twice a day, working carefully while Blaze lay still, trusting him completely now in a way that made Ethan's chest feel tight every time he thought about it. The wound began to close, pink and angry at first, then fading to a pale scar that would probably stay with the dog for the rest of his life. A reminder. A badge. Proof that something vicious could choose something else. The ranch work didn't stop for recovery. Fences still needed mending, the creek still needed clearing where debris had piled up, and the roof of the barn had started leaking in 2 places during the last rain. Ethan worked through it all, and Blaze watched from the porch, head resting on his paws, eyes tracking every movement. On the 8th day, the dog stood up, stretched, and walked out to where Ethan was digging post holes. "You should be resting," Ethan said, not looking up. Blaze sat down 3 feet away and stared at him. "I'm serious, that shoulder's not fully healed." The dog didn't move. Ethan drove the post hole digger into the ground, twisted, pulled up a scoop of rocky dirt. "Fine, but if you tear something open, don't come crying to me." Blaze's tail wagged once. They worked together that way, Ethan fixing what was broken and Blaze keeping watch. And if anyone had asked Ethan why it mattered, why having a dog nearby made the work feel less like punishment, he wouldn't have had an answer. He just knew that the silence wasn't as heavy anymore. The isolation didn't press down quite as hard. By the end of the 2nd week, Blaze was moving almost normally, the limp barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Ethan started taking him on longer walks past the fence line and into the scrubland beyond, teaching him to heel and stay and come when called. Blaze learned fast, faster than any dog Ethan had ever trained, like he'd been waiting his whole short life for someone to show him what the rules were. "You're a smart one," Ethan said one afternoon as they walked back toward the house. The sun was low, throwing long shadows across the valley. "Probably too smart for your own good." Blaze looked up at him, tongue lolling, and Ethan could have sworn the dog was smiling. That night, for the first time, Blaze didn't sleep in the barn. He curled up on the floor beside Ethan's bed, close enough that Ethan could hear him breathing. It was a good sound, steady, alive. Ethan lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling beams, thinking about how fast things could change. A month ago, this dog had been a snarling, half-starved mess that everyone had written off. Now he was here, safe, healing, choosing to stay. Maybe that meant something. Maybe it didn't, but it felt like it did, and that was enough. The next morning, Ethan woke to find Blaze already outside, barking at something near the fence line. He pulled on his boots and stepped out into the cool dawn air, scanning the property. At first, he didn't see anything, but then movement caught his eye. A coyote, lean and gray, slinking along the far edge of the property. Blaze barked again, sharper this time, and the coyote froze, ears swiveling. It stared at them for a long moment, weighing its options, then turned and loped off into the scrub. "Good boy," Ethan said, and meant it. Blaze trotted back, chest puffed out like he'd just won a war. Ethan made coffee and sat on the porch steps, watching the sun climb. Blaze settled beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. The air smelled like dust and sage, and somewhere in the distance a hawk screamed. "We should go into town today," Ethan said. "Need to pick up a few things." Blaze's ears perked up. "Yeah, I figured you'd want to come." They rode in an hour later, Ethan on the mare and Blaze trotting alongside, his gait strong and sure now despite the healing shoulder. Copper Ridge was busy for a weekday, farmers hauling wagons of grain, women carrying baskets of laundry, kids chasing each other through the alleys. Ethan tied the mare outside the general store, and Blaze sat without being told, watching the street with calm, intelligent eyes. Ethan was halfway through the door when a voice stopped him. "That your dog?" He turned. The man standing behind him was tall, broad-shouldered, with a badge pinned to his vest. Sheriff Dale Tennant. Ethan had met him exactly twice, once when he'd first moved to the area, and once when a dispute over water rights had nearly turned into a shooting. Tennant was the kind of lawman who didn't talk much but didn't miss much either. "He is," Ethan said. Tennant looked at Blaze, then back at Ethan. "Heard you bought him off Sal Drucker. Heard he was mean." "He was scared," Ethan corrected. "There's a difference." Tennant's eyes narrowed. "Looks calm enough now." He is. Good. Tennant adjusted his hat.
Weshalb?
Because I've had 3 complaints this month about dogs attacking livestock. Farmers are getting nervous. Last thing I need is another problem. Ethan felt something cold settle in his gut. Blaze hasn't attacked anything. I believe you, but you keep him close, hear me? People get scared, they do stupid things, and I'd hate to see a good dog pay the price for someone else's nerves. Understood, Ethan said, though his jaw was tight. Tennant tipped his hat and walked off. Ethan watched him go, then crouched down beside Blaze. The dog leaned into his hand, eyes half closed. You stay out of trouble, Ethan muttered. I mean it. Blaze licked his wrist. Inside the store, Ethan bought flour, salt, a new coil of rope, and a bag of dried beans. The clerk, a thin woman named Mrs. Haver, eyed him over the counter. That dog outside yours? Yes, ma'am. He well behaved? Very. She sniffed. My husband says dogs like that can't be trusted. Says they turn on you when you least expect it. Ethan handed her the money for his purchases. Your husband ever owned a dog like that? Well, no, but then maybe he doesn't know what he's talking about. Mrs. Haver's mouth pinched into a thin line. She handed him his change without another word. Ethan loaded the supplies onto the mare and swung into the saddle. Blaze fell into step beside them, and they headed out of town at an easy pace. But Ethan's mind wasn't easy. Tennant's warning echoed in his head, and so did Mrs. Haver's suspicion. It didn't matter that Blaze had changed. People saw what they expected to see, and they expected trouble. He'd have to be careful. They both would. The ride back was quiet. The sky had turned the color of old brass, heavy with the promise of rain that probably wouldn't come. Ethan scanned the horizon out of habit, looking for storms, but there was nothing. Just heat and dust and the endless stretch of land that went on until it hit the mountains. When they reached the ranch, Ethan unsaddled the mare and hauled the supplies inside. Blaze drank from the water trough, then flopped down in the shade of the porch, panting. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching the dog, and felt the weight of what he'd taken on settle a little heavier. Saving Blaze wasn't just about feeding him and patching him up. It was about protecting him from a world that had already decided he was dangerous. And that was a fight Ethan wasn't sure he could win, but he'd try. He owed Blaze that much. The days rolled forward. Ethan worked the land and Blaze stayed close, learning the rhythms of ranch life like he'd been born to it. He learned to stay out of the way when Ethan was splitting wood, learned to bark when strangers approached, learned to curl up by the fire in the evenings and sleep without flinching at every sound. And slowly, Ethan started to relax, started to believe that maybe things would be okay. Then the storm came. It started as a low rumble on the western horizon, dark clouds piling up like a wall. Ethan was fixing the gate to the corral when he saw it, and his stomach dropped. He'd seen storms like this before, the kind that came out of nowhere and tore everything apart. Flash floods, lightning strikes, winds strong enough to rip roofs off buildings. Blaze, he called. Inside, now! The dog came running, and they both made it into the house just as the first fat drops of rain started to fall. Within minutes, it was a downpour, sheets of water hammering the roof, the wind howling like something alive. Ethan lit the lamp and sat at the table, listening to the storm tear at the world outside. Blaze paced, restless, ears flicking at every crash of thunder. Easy, Ethan said. We're safe in here. But even as he said it, he heard something crack, loud, sharp, the sound of wood splintering. He grabbed the lamp and went to the window. Through the rain, he could just make out the barn. Part of the roof had caved in, the old timbers finally giving up after years of holding on. Damn it, Ethan muttered. The mare was in there. If the whole thing came down... He didn't finish the thought. He grabbed his coat, pulled it on, and headed for the door. Blaze barked, sharp and urgent. Stay, Ethan said. I'll be right back. He stepped out into the storm. The rain hit him like a fist, cold and brutal, soaking through his coat in seconds. He could barely see 5 feet in front of him, but he knew the way to the barn by heart. He stumbled forward, boots sinking into mud, wind trying to shove him sideways. The barn door was stuck, swollen from the rain. Ethan put his shoulder into it and shoved, and it finally gave way. Inside, the mare was wild-eyed, stamping and pulling at her halter. Part of the roof had collapsed into the far corner, timbers and shingles piled in a heap. "Easy, girl," Ethan said, moving slowly. "Easy." He got the halter off and led her toward the door, but just as they reached it, another crack echoed through the barn, louder this time, closer. Ethan looked up and saw one of the main support beams sagging, splitting down the middle. He didn't think. He just moved, shoving the mare out the door and diving after her. The beam came down a second later, slamming into the ground where he'd been standing, and the whole roof groaned like it was about to collapse. Ethan scrambled to his feet, grabbed the mare's mane, and pulled her toward the house. The rain was blinding now, the wind screaming, and he could barely keep his footing. But he kept moving, one step at a time, until they reached the corral. He got the mare inside, latched the gate, and turned back toward the house. That's when he realized Blaze wasn't there. Panic hit him, sharp and immediate. He told the dog to stay. Blaze should have been inside, safe. But when Ethan reached the porch, the door was open, swinging on its hinges, and Blaze was gone. "Blaze!" he shouted, but the wind tore his voice away. "Blaze!" Nothing. Ethan's heart was pounding now, fear clawing at his ribs. He grabbed the lamp, useless in this rain, but he grabbed it anyway, and plunged back into the storm. "Blaze, where are you?" He circled the house, then the barn, then started toward the creek. The water was running high, brown, and fast, churning over rocks that were usually dry. Ethan's mind raced. If Blaze had gone down there, if he'd slipped, if the current had taken him, "Blaze!" he screamed. And then he heard it, faint, almost swallowed by the storm. A bark. High-pitched, desperate. Ethan ran toward the sound, slipping in the mud, catching himself on rocks and scrub. The barking got louder, and then he saw him. Blaze was in the creek, not in the water, but on a narrow ledge halfway down the ravine, pressed against the rock wall. The ledge was crumbling, chunks of it breaking off and falling into the churning water below. The dog was soaked, shaking, eyes wide with fear. Ethan's breath caught. The ravine was steep, slick with rain, the edges unstable. One wrong step and he'd go over. But Blaze was down there, and Ethan wasn't leaving him. He found a sturdy root sticking out of the bank and tested it. It held. He wrapped the rope from his belt around it, tied a loop, and started down. The rock was slippery, worse than he'd expected. His boots couldn't find purchase, and twice he nearly fell, catching himself at the last second by grabbing handfuls of wet grass. The rain hammered down and the creek roared below, hungry and relentless. "Hang on!" he shouted. "I'm coming!" Blaze barked again, and Ethan could hear the fear in it. The same fear that had been there the first day, locked in that crate, convinced the world was out to hurt him. Ethan gritted his teeth and kept going. He made it halfway down before the ledge Blaze was on gave way. It happened fast. A crack, a groan, and then the whole thing broke apart, stones tumbling into the water. Blaze yelped and jumped, scrabbling for solid ground, but there was nothing. He hit the water with a splash and went under. "No!" Ethan didn't think. He let go of the rope and dove. The water was cold, shockingly cold, and the current grabbed him immediately, pulling him under. He kicked hard, broke the surface, and looked around wildly. There, Blaze's head just above the water, paddling frantically. Ethan swam toward him, fighting the current every inch of the way. His clothes dragged at him, heavy and clinging, and his lungs burned. But he kept going, reaching, stretching, until his fingers closed around wet fur. He pulled Blaze close, wrapping one arm around the dog's chest, and looked for the bank. It was too far. The current was too strong. They were being pulled downstream, toward a section where the creek narrowed and the rocks jutted up like teeth. Ethan kicked harder, angling toward the bank, but it wasn't enough. They were going to hit those rocks, and if they did... His hand caught something, a branch, half submerged, sticking out from the bank. He grabbed it, held on, felt it bend under their combined weight. Blaze coughed, choking on water, claws digging into Ethan's arm. "I got you," Ethan gasped. "I got you." The branch cracked. Ethan lunged, pulling them both toward the bank, his free hand scrabbling for anything solid. His fingers found a root, thick and gnarled, and he grabbed it with everything he had. The current tried to tear them away, but Ethan held on, teeth gritted, muscles screaming. Inch by inch, he hauled them out of the water. When they finally reached solid ground, Ethan collapsed, Blaze still clutched against his chest. They both lay there in the mud, gasping, the rain still falling but softer now, the worst of the storm moving on. Ethan coughed, spat out water, and looked down at the dog. Blaze was shaking, eyes glazed, but he was breathing, alive. "You stupid, stupid dog," Ethan said, and his voice cracked. "What were you thinking?" Blaze looked up at him, and in those eyes was something Ethan recognized, had recognized from the very beginning. Not stupidity, not recklessness, just a desperate need to not be left alone. Ethan pulled him closer, burying his face in wet fur, and for a moment he didn't care about the rain or the cold or the fact that he'd just nearly drowned. Blaze was here. He was alive. They both were. "We're okay," Ethan whispered. "We're okay." The walk back to the house took forever. Ethan's legs felt like lead, and Blaze could barely stand, limping heavily on the shoulder that had taken the snake bite. But they made it. Step by step, they made it. Inside, Ethan peeled off his soaked clothes and wrapped Blaze in every blanket he could find. He built up the fire until it roared, then collapsed on the floor beside the dog, too exhausted to move. Blaze rested his head on Ethan's leg, eyes closing. "Don't do that again," Ethan said quietly. "You hear me? Don't ever do that again." Blaze's tail thumped once, weak but there. Ethan closed his eyes and let the warmth of the fire seep into his bones. Outside, the storm was dying, the thunder fading into the distance. Inside, for the first time in what felt like years, Ethan wasn't alone. And that was worth every risk. The next morning, the world looked scrubbed clean. The sky was a hard, clear blue, and the air smelled like wet earth and new growth. Ethan stepped outside to survey the damage. The barn roof was worse than he'd thought, half of it completely gone, the other half sagging dangerously. The corral fence had come down in 2 places, and the creek was still running high, brown water churning over rocks that had been dry for months. Blaze limped out onto the porch, favoring his shoulder again. Ethan crouched down and checked the wound. It had opened slightly, blood seeping through the scar tissue. "You tore it," Ethan said, sighing. "Of course you did." He went inside, got the medical kit, and redressed the wound while Blaze sat patiently. The dog didn't whine, didn't pull away, just accepted the pain like it was something he'd earned. "You didn't earn this," Ethan said quietly, tying off the bandage. "You know that, right? You didn't do anything wrong." Blaze licked his hand. Ethan spent the rest of the day clearing debris and patching what he could. The barn would need serious work, new beams, new shingles, maybe a whole new roof. But that would take time and money he didn't have. For now, he just made sure it wouldn't collapse on the mare. Blaze watched from the porch, and every time Ethan glanced over, the dog was there, eyes tracking his every movement, keeping watch, making sure he was safe. That evening, as the sun set and painted the valley gold, Ethan sat on the porch steps with Blaze beside him. The air was cooling, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "You know what I think?" Ethan said, scratching behind Blaze's good ear. "I think you and me, we're a lot alike. Both got scars. Both got things we're running from. But maybe that's okay. Maybe scars just mean we survived." Blaze leaned into him, warm and solid. "Yeah," Ethan said softly. "Maybe that's enough." The stars came out one by one, bright and cold, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something close to peace. But peace never lasted long out here. Ethan learned that truth again 3 days later when he rode into Copper Ridge for lumber and found the town buzzing with tension he could feel before he even dismounted. Men clustered outside the saloon talking low and angry. Women hurried past with their heads down. And when Ethan tied his mare to the hitching post, more than a few people stopped to stare. Not at him, but at Blaze, who sat calmly at his side. Something was wrong. Ethan headed into the general store, and Mrs. Haver looked up from the counter with an expression that was half pity, half accusation. "You haven't heard," she said. It wasn't a question. "Heard what?" She folded her hands on the counter, and Ethan noticed they were shaking slightly. "The Morrison place. Something got into their chicken coop 2 nights ago. Killed 8 hens, tore them apart." Ethan's stomach tightened. "A coyote?" "That's what some folks are saying, but others..." She glanced toward the window, where Blaze was visible through the dusty glass. Others are saying it was a dog. Blaze was with me 2 nights ago, Ethan said immediately. He didn't leave the ranch. I'm just telling you what people are saying. Mrs. Haver's voice softened, but only slightly. There's talk, Mr. Cross. And talk has a way of turning into action around here. Ethan bought his lumber without another word and loaded it onto the mare. His hands moved automatically, but his mind was racing. He knew how this worked. Fear spread faster than fire, and once people decided something was true, facts didn't matter much. He was halfway to untying the mare when a voice called out behind him. Cross, hold up. Ethan turned. Sheriff Tennant was walking toward him, his face unreadable in the afternoon light. Sheriff, Ethan said evenly. Tennant stopped a few feet away, thumbs hooked in his belt. You hear about the Morrisons? Just now. Your dog with you that night? He was. All night? Ethan met his eyes. All night. Slept on the floor next to my bed, same as he does every night. Tennant studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I believe you, but believing you and convincing everyone else are 2 different things. He glanced at Blaze, who was watching them both with calm, intelligent eyes. That dog's got a history. People remember. And when something bad happens, they look for someone to blame. He's not the same animal he was, Ethan said, and there was an edge in his voice he didn't bother to hide. Anyone who spent 5 minutes around him can see that. Maybe so. But all it takes is one person deciding they don't want to take that chance. Tennant adjusted his hat. I'm not here to give you trouble, Cross. I'm here to give you a warning. Keep that dog close. Don't give anyone a reason to come after him. I wasn't planning on it. Good. Tennant turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you did a decent thing taking him in, but decent doesn't always count for much when people are scared. He walked away, and Ethan stood there for a moment, jaw tight, fists clenched. Then he climbed into the saddle and rode out of town without looking back. Blaze trotted beside the mare, oblivious to the storm gathering around them both. The ride home was tense. Ethan kept scanning the horizon, watching for riders, for trouble, for anything that might signal the town had decided to take matters into their own hands. But the land stayed empty, just dust and scrub, and the occasional hawk circling overhead. When they reached the ranch, Ethan unsaddled the mare and carried the lumber into the barn. Blaze followed, staying close, and Ethan realized the dog could sense his mood, the tightness in his shoulders, the way his movements were sharper than usual. It's all right, Ethan said, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring Blaze or himself. We'll figure it out. That night, Ethan sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap, watching the road. He told himself he was being paranoid, told himself Tennant's warning was just that, a warning, not a prediction. But he kept the rifle close anyway, and when Blaze settled beside him, Ethan rested a hand on the dog's head and didn't move it. The stars came out cold and distant, and the night stretched on. Nothing happened. No riders, no torches, no angry voices demanding justice. But Ethan didn't sleep. The next morning, he rode back into town. Not because he wanted to, but because hiding would only make things worse. People needed to see that he wasn't running, that he had nothing to hide. Blaze came with him. That was non-negotiable. Copper Ridge was quieter than usual, the streets half empty, even though it was mid-morning. Ethan tied the mare outside the blacksmith's shop and stepped inside. The heat hit him immediately, a wall of it rolling off the forge where a man named Garrett was hammering a piece of red-hot iron into shape. Garrett looked up, saw Ethan, and set down his hammer. He was a big man, all muscle and soot, with a beard that reached halfway down his chest. Ethan, he said, wiping his hands on his apron. Didn't expect to see you today. Needed a few things, Ethan said. Hinges, nails, some sheet metal for the barn roof. Garrett nodded slowly, but his eyes drifted to the window where Blaze was visible outside. That your dog? He is. Heard about the Morrisons. I heard too. Wasn't Blaze. You sure about that? Ethan's jaw tightened. I'm sure. Garrett studied him for a moment, then sighed. Look, I'm not saying I think it was your dog, But people are talking, and when people talk, things get complicated. He turned back to the forge, picked up a pair of tongs. I'll get you what you need. But do me a favor, keep that dog out of sight for a while. Let things cool down. He hasn't done anything wrong, Ethan said. I know, but that doesn't always matter. Ethan paid for the supplies and loaded them onto the mare. As he worked, he noticed people watching from across the street. Not openly, but in that sideways way people had when they didn't want to be caught staring. He ignored them, climbed into the saddle, and rode toward the edge of town. He made it about 50 yards before someone stepped into the road. It was a man Ethan didn't recognize, thin and sunburned, with a rifle slung over his shoulder. Behind him, 2 more men appeared, flanking him on either side. Ethan reined in the mare. Blaze stopped too, ears forward, sensing the shift in the air. That the dog? The first man said. His voice was flat, hard. It is, Ethan said carefully, and we're leaving. No trouble. Trouble's already here, the man said. That animal killed my brother-in-law's chickens, tore them to pieces. Now he's asking what's to stop it from going after something bigger. A calf, a child. Blaze was with me that night, Ethan said. He didn't go anywhere near the Morrison place. You say that, but you can't prove it. Ethan's hand drifted toward the rifle strapped to his saddle. He didn't draw it, but the movement was enough to make the 3 men tense. I'm not looking for a fight, Ethan said evenly, but I'm not giving up my dog either. The man with the rifle stepped closer. Maybe you don't get a choice, Blaze growled, low, deep, a sound that carried warning. The man stopped. His hand went to the rifle on his shoulder. Don't, Ethan said, and his voice was cold now, stripped of anything resembling patience. You draw that weapon. This ends badly for everyone. For a long moment, no one moved. The street was silent, except for the wind rattling a loose shutter somewhere down the block. Then a new voice cut through the tension. That's enough! Sheriff Tennant was walking toward them, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. He didn't look hurried, didn't look worried, but there was something in his posture that made it clear he wasn't asking. Tom, Tennant said, addressing the man with the rifle. You and your friends need to step aside. Sheriff, that dog wasn't anywhere near the Morrison place, Tennant interrupted. I checked. Crosshair was home all night, and so was the dog. I got 2 neighbors who saw smoke from his chimney and heard him working in the barn at dawn. So unless that dog learned how to be in 2 places at once, he's innocent. Tom's jaw worked, but he didn't argue. After a moment, he stepped aside and his friends followed. Tennant looked up at Ethan. Get out of here, now! Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He nudged the mare forward, and Blaze fell into step beside them. They rode past the 3 men without looking back, and Ethan didn't let himself relax until Copper Ridge was a mile behind them. When they reached the ranch, Ethan dismounted and stood there for a moment, hands shaking with leftover adrenaline. Blaze sat beside him, calm, waiting. That was too close, Ethan muttered. He crouched down and scratched behind Blaze's ears. We need to be smarter. Careful. Blaze leaned into his hand, eyes half closed. Ethan stood and looked out at the valley, at the scrubland stretching toward the mountains. This was his land, his home, and he'd be damned if he let fear drive him off it. But fear was a powerful thing, and he knew it wasn't done with them yet. The days that followed were tense. Ethan worked the ranch, fixed what needed fixing, and kept Blaze close. He stopped going into town unless he absolutely had to, and when he did, he went armed and alert. The town left them alone, but the silence felt fragile, like glass stretched too thin. Then, one afternoon, a rider appeared on the road. Ethan was replacing a section of fence when he saw the dust cloud rising in the distance. He set down the hammer, wiped his hands on his pants, and walked toward the house. Blaze was already there, standing on the porch, watching. The rider came closer, and Ethan recognized him, a young man named Peter Larkin, who worked at the livery stable. He reined in his horse and dismounted, looking nervous. Mr. Cross, Peter said, nodding. Sorry to bother you. What do you need? Peter glanced at Blaze, then back at Ethan. Sheriff sent me. Said to tell you there's been another attack last night. The Carson Ranch, about 10 miles south of town. Something got into their sheep pen, killed 3 of them. Ethan's blood went cold. And let me guess, people are saying it was Blaze. Peter shifted uncomfortably. Some are. But the sheriff, he wants you to know he's looking into it. Says he doesn't think it was your dog, but he needs you to come into town, answer some questions, clear things up. When? Tomorrow morning, early. Ethan nodded slowly. Tell him I'll be there. Peter climbed back onto his horse and rode off, leaving Ethan standing in the yard with Blaze at his side. This is getting out of hand, Ethan muttered. He looked down at the dog. You were here last night. I know you were. But how do I prove that to people who've already made up their minds? Blaze tilted his head, ears forward. Ethan sighed and went inside. That night, he barely slept. He kept running through possibilities, trying to figure out what he'd say, how he'd defend Blaze against accusations that didn't have any evidence but wouldn't need much to stick. By the time dawn came, he'd made a decision. He was going into town, and he was bringing Blaze with him. If people wanted to accuse the dog, they could do it to his face. They rode in just after sunrise. The streets were empty, the town still waking up. Ethan tied the mare outside the sheriff's office and stepped inside with Blaze at his heels. Tennant was sitting at his desk, going through papers. He looked up when Ethan entered, and his expression was grim. Cross, he said. Thanks for coming. Didn't feel like I had much choice. Tennant gestured to a chair. Sit. We need to talk. Ethan sat. Blaze settled beside him, calm but watchful. The Carson Ranch, Tennant began. 3 sheep, throats torn out. Whatever did it was strong, fast, and vicious. Could have been a wolf. Could have been a big coyote. Could have been a dog. But it wasn't Blaze, Ethan said firmly. I know. Tennant leaned back in his chair. Because I sent a deputy out to your place last night. He watched your ranch from a distance, just to make sure. Saw you working late, saw your dog with you the whole time. Saw you both go inside and stay inside. Ethan blinked. You were watching me? I was protecting you, Tennant corrected, because I knew if another attack happened and I didn't have proof of where your dog was, this town would have torn him apart. And probably you along with him. Ethan didn't know what to say. He'd expected suspicion, accusations, maybe even an arrest. Not protection. So what now? He asked finally. Now I tell the town the truth, Tennant said, that your dog is innocent, that whatever's killing livestock, it's not him. He paused. But here's the thing, Cross. The truth doesn't always win. People are scared, and scared people do stupid things. So even after I clear your dog, you're going to have to watch your back. I've been doing that already. I know, just keep doing it. Ethan stood. Thanks, Sheriff. Tennant nodded. Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. Ethan left the office and stepped back into the street. The sun was higher now, warming the air, and a few people were starting to appear, shopkeepers opening their doors, farmers hauling goods to the market. And then Ethan saw him. Tom, the man from a few days ago, the one with the rifle. He was standing outside the saloon with the same 2 friends, and all 3 of them were staring at Ethan. No, not at Ethan. At Blaze. Ethan's hand went to the rifle on his saddle, but before he could do anything, Tom started walking toward them. His friends followed, and Ethan's pulse kicked up. Cross, Tom said when he was close enough. His voice was tight, controlled. Sheriff says your dog didn't do it. That's right. Says he's got proof. He does. Tom looked down at Blaze, and for a long moment, he just stared. Then he did something Ethan didn't expect. He crouched down. Blaze tensed, ears flicking back, but he didn't growl. Tom extended a hand slowly, palm down, and waited. Blaze sniffed it. Once. Twice. Then, hesitantly, he leaned forward and licked Tom's fingers. Tom exhaled, a sound that was almost a laugh. Hell, he said quietly. He really isn't mean, is he? No, Ethan said. He's not. Tom stood, wiping his hand on his pants. I was wrong about him. About you too, I guess. He glanced at his friends, then back at Ethan. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Ethan didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Tom and his friends walked away, and Ethan stood there in the street, feeling like something had shifted. Not everything. Not enough to make the danger disappear. but enough to matter. He climbed into the saddle and rode out of town with Blaze beside him, and for the first time in days he felt like maybe they had a chance. But the reprieve didn't last. That night, as Ethan was finishing up work in the barn, he heard Blaze barking. Not the warning bark he used for coyotes or strangers. Something different, frantic, desperate. Ethan dropped the tools and ran outside. Blaze was at the edge of the property, staring into the scrubland, barking like his life depended on it. "What is it?" Ethan called, running toward him. Then he saw it, a shape in the darkness, low to the ground, moving fast. Not a coyote. Too big. Not a wolf. Wrong shape. A dog. A big one, almost twice Blaze's size, with a scarred muzzle and wild eyes. It was thin, ribs showing, fur matted with dirt and blood. And it was staring right at them. Ethan's blood ran cold. This was the animal that had been killing livestock. Had to be. The dog snarled, lips pulling back to show teeth that were stained dark. It took a step forward and Blaze stepped between it and Ethan, hackles raised, teeth bared. "Blaze, no," Ethan said, but the dog didn't move. The wild dog lunged. Blaze met it head on, and the two animals collided with a sound that made Ethan's stomach turn. They rolled, snapping and clawing, a blur of fur and teeth. Ethan grabbed the rifle he'd left leaning against the fence and raised it, but he couldn't get a clear shot. The two dogs were too close, moving too fast. Blaze yelped as the wild dog's teeth found his leg, but he didn't let go. He twisted, sank his own teeth into the other dog's shoulder, and held on. The wild dog howled, a sound that was more rage than pain, and threw Blaze off. The smaller dog hit the ground hard, rolled, and scrambled back to his feet. Ethan saw his chance. He fired. The shot echoed across the valley, and the wild dog jerked, stumbled, then turned and bolted into the darkness. Ethan fired again, but the animal was already gone, swallowed by the night. Blaze stood there, panting, blood dripping from a gash on his leg. Ethan dropped the rifle and ran to him, falling to his knees. "Let me see," he said, his hands shaking. "Let me see." The wound wasn't deep, but it was ugly, jagged, the kind that would scar. Ethan pulled off his shirt and wrapped it around Blaze's leg, tying it tight. "You stupid, brave, stupid dog," he muttered, and his voice cracked. "You didn't have to do that." Blaze licked his hand, and Ethan pulled him close, holding him like he was afraid the dog might disappear if he let go. They sat there in the dirt for a long time, the stars cold and bright above them, and Ethan realized something. He wasn't just protecting Blaze anymore. Blaze was protecting him too, and that changed everything. Ethan carried Blaze into the house and laid him on the floor near the fireplace. The dog's breathing was labored, each inhale sharp and shallow, and the makeshift bandage was already soaked through with blood. Ethan's hands moved on instinct, unwrapping the shirt, examining the wound in the lamplight. The gash ran from Blaze's shoulder down to his foreleg, deep enough that Ethan could see muscle beneath the torn skin. "Stay still," Ethan muttered, though Blaze wasn't fighting him. The dog lay there, eyes open but glassy, trusting completely even as Ethan cleaned the wound with whiskey that had to burn like fire. Blaze flinched but didn't pull away. Ethan threaded a needle with shaking hands and started stitching. He'd done this before. On himself, on horses, once on a man who'd gotten knifed in a bar fight, but never on something that mattered this much. Each pull of the thread felt like it took forever, and by the time he tied off the last stitch, sweat was dripping down his face. "There," he said, sitting back. "You're going to have another scar. Collection's getting impressive." Blaze's tail thumped once against the floor. Ethan wrapped the leg in clean bandages, then just sat there, one hand resting on the dog's side, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing. Outside, the night was quiet now, the wild dog long gone. But Ethan knew it would come back. Animals like that didn't just disappear. They circled. They waited. And when they were desperate enough, they attacked again. He couldn't let that happen. The next morning, Ethan rode into town before the sun was fully up. Blaze stayed behind, curled up by the fire, too sore to walk much. Ethan hated leaving him, but this couldn't wait. Sheriff Tennant was already in his office, pouring coffee from a dented pot. He looked up when Ethan walked in, took one look at his face, and set the pot down. "What happened?" "Found your killer," Ethan said. "Big dog, half wild, covered in scars. Attacked my place last night. Blaze fought it off, but it got away. I winged it with the rifle, but not enough to put it down. Tennant's expression darkened. You sure it was a dog? Positive. Wasn't a wolf, wasn't a coyote. It was a dog someone trained to fight and then either lost or let go. Mean as hell and twice as dangerous. Tennant rubbed his jaw. That explains the kills. Dogs like that, they don't hunt clean, they just destroy. He paused. Your dog all right? He will be. Took a bad bite, but I stitched him up. He fought it? Didn't hesitate. Tennant let out a long breath. Well, that ought to settle things with the town. Dog defends his home, protects his owner. That's not the behavior of a vicious animal. Maybe, Ethan said, but I need your help tracking this thing down before it kills again, or before it comes back to finish what it started. Agreed. Tennant grabbed his hat off the desk. I'll get a few men together. We'll ride out this afternoon, see if we can pick up a trail. I'm coming with you. Figured you would. They found the trail 2 miles south of Ethan's ranch, a line of disturbed brush and dried blood leading into the hills. The posse was small, just Tennant, Ethan, and 3 other men from town, including Garrett from the blacksmith shop and a rancher named Hayes. They rode in silence, eyes scanning the terrain, hands never far from their rifles. The trail led them into rough country, all rocks and scrub and narrow ravines that could hide a dozen threats. Ethan's mare picked her way carefully, and he kept one hand on the reins, the other on his rifle. There, Hayes said, pointing. Blood on that rock. They dismounted and examined the spot. Fresh blood, still tacky to the touch. The wild dog had come through here recently, maybe an hour ago. It's hurt, Garrett said. Your shot must have done more damage than you thought. Good, Ethan said flatly. Makes it easier to catch. They followed the trail deeper into the hills, the sun climbing higher, the heat pressing down. Ethan's shirt was soaked with sweat, and his throat was dry, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop, not until this was finished. The trail ended at the mouth of a shallow cave, half hidden by a tumble of boulders. Tennant held up a hand, signaling everyone to stop. They dismounted, tied the horses, and approached on foot. Ethan could hear it before he saw it, a low, wet growl coming from inside the cave. He raised his rifle, and Tennant did the same. Careful, Tennant said quietly. Wounded animals are unpredictable. They moved closer, and Ethan caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows. 2 eyes reflecting the light, a shape, low and tense, ready to spring. Come out of there, Tennant called. Nice and slow. The growling intensified. Tennant glanced at Ethan. We're not getting it out without force. Ethan nodded. He stepped to the side, trying to get a better angle, and that's when the wild dog lunged. It came out of the cave like a bullet, teeth bared, blood matted in its fur. Garrett yelled and fired, but the shot went wide. The dog hit Hayes, knocking him to the ground, jaws snapping at his throat. Ethan didn't think. He swung the rifle like a club, catching the dog across the ribs. It yelped and released Hayes, spinning toward Ethan with eyes that were pure rage. Tennant fired. The shot was clean, hitting the dog square in the chest. It staggered, took one more step, then collapsed. For a moment, no one moved. Then Hayes scrambled to his feet, breathing hard, hands shaking. I'm all right, he said, though his voice was unsteady. I'm all right. Ethan approached the body carefully, rifle still raised. The dog wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. He crouched down, looked at the scars covering its body, old wounds, badly healed, the kind that came from years of abuse. Poor bastard, Garrett said quietly, standing beside him. Someone did this to him, made him like this. Ethan didn't respond. He was thinking about Blaze, about how close the dog had come to ending up the same way. Vicious, broken, beyond saving. But Blaze hadn't, because someone had given him a chance. This dog never got that chance. Tennant walked over, looked down at the body, then at Ethan. It's done, he said. Town's safe now. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. It's done. They buried the dog in a shallow grave near the cave, covering it with rocks to keep scavengers away. It wasn't much, but it felt necessary. A small acknowledgement that the animal had suffered, even if it had caused suffering in turn. By the time they rode back into Copper Ridge, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. The town was waiting, word having spread that the sheriff's posse had gone hunting. People gathered in the street as they rode in, watching, waiting for answers. Tennant dismounted and addressed the crowd. "We found the animal that's been killing livestock. It's dead. Wasn't a wolf, wasn't a coyote. It was a dog. A fighting dog by the looks of it. Someone's animal that either got loose or was abandoned." A murmur ran through the crowd. "And just so everyone knows," Tennant continued, raising his voice, "Ethan Cross's dog had nothing to do with the attacks. In fact, his dog fought off the wild one when it came to his ranch, defended his home. So anyone who's been talking about putting Blaze down can shut their mouths right now." The crowd shifted, uncomfortable. A few people looked away. Others nodded, accepting the truth now that it was laid out plain. Ethan didn't wait for more. He climbed back into the saddle and rode out, exhausted and relieved in equal measure. When he got home, Blaze was waiting on the porch, limping but standing. The dog's tail wagged when he saw Ethan, and Ethan felt something in his chest loosen. "Hey boy," he said, dismounting. He crouched down and ran his hands over Blaze's head, checking the bandage. "We got him. It's over." Blaze leaned into him, and Ethan wrapped his arms around the dog, holding him close. "You did good," he whispered. "You did so good." The next few days passed quietly. Ethan worked on the barn, replacing the damaged roof, and Blaze stayed close, watching. The dog's leg healed slowly but steadily, and by the end of the week he was walking almost normally again. Ethan thought things might finally settle, that the worst was behind them. But then, on a Tuesday morning, a rider came to the ranch. Not Peter Larkin this time, someone Ethan didn't recognize. A man in a clean suit, riding a horse that was too well groomed for ranch country. Ethan met him in the yard, Blaze at his side. "Can I help you?" Ethan asked. The man dismounted, brushing dust from his coat. "Ethan Cross?" "That's right. My name is Martin Colfax. I'm an attorney from Denver. I represent a man named Victor Drummond." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Never heard of him." "He's heard of you, or rather, he's heard of your dog." Colfax gestured toward Blaze. "That him? What's this about?" Colfax reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "This is a legal claim of ownership, Mr. Drummond asserts that the dog in your possession was stolen from him approximately 6 months ago. He's prepared to provide documentation proving the animal is his property." Ethan stared at the paper like it was a snake. "That's ridiculous. I bought Blaze from Sal Drucker, paid him $1 for the dog and the crate he was in." "Mr. Drucker had no legal right to sell the animal," Colfax said smoothly. "He acquired it unlawfully. Therefore, the sale is void." "Unlawfully how?" "Mr. Drummond's property was robbed. Several items were taken, including this dog. Mr. Drucker was later found in possession of goods matching the description of the stolen items. He sold them before he could be apprehended." Ethan's mind raced. "And you're saying Drummond wants Blaze back?" "Correct." "Why now? It's been 6 months." "Mr. Drummond has been searching for the animal ever since it was taken. He only recently learned of its whereabouts." Colfax tucked the paper back into his coat. "I'm here to give you fair warning. Mr. Drummond will be arriving in Copper Ridge tomorrow to reclaim his property. If you surrender the dog peacefully, there will be no legal action. If you refuse, he'll pursue the matter through the courts." Ethan looked down at Blaze, who was sitting calmly, watching the stranger with wary eyes. "This dog was half-starved and vicious when I got him. Someone hurt him, badly." "I'm not here to debate the animal's history," Colfax said. "I'm here to inform you of Mr. Drummond's legal rights." "Legal rights," Ethan repeated, and there was an edge in his voice now. "What about what's right for the dog?" "That's not my concern." Colfax climbed back onto his horse. "Tomorrow, Mr. Cross. Be prepared." He rode off, leaving Ethan standing in the yard with his fists clenched and his heart pounding. Blaze looked up at him, head tilted. "I'm not giving you up," Ethan said quietly. "I don't care who this Drummond is or what he thinks he's owed. You're mine, and I'm yours." That night, Ethan rode into town and went straight to the sheriff's office. Tennant was locking up for the evening, but he unlocked the door when he saw Ethan. "What's wrong?" Ethan told him everything, the lawyer, the claim, the threat. Tennant listened, his expression growing darker with each word. When Ethan finished, he sat down heavily in his chair. Victor Drummond, Tennant said slowly. I've heard that name. He runs fighting rings up north. Dog fights, bare-knuckle boxing, anything people will bet on. Nasty business. So Blaze was a fighting dog? Probably. And if Drummond's coming all this way to get him back, it means the dog was valuable. Either he won a lot of fights or Drummond's got other plans for him. I'm not handing him over, Ethan said. I understand. But legally, if Drummond can prove ownership, I don't care about legally, Ethan interrupted. That man hurt Blaze, turned him into something vicious. And now that the dog's healed, now that he's not a weapon anymore, Drummond wants him back? To do what? Put him back in a fighting pit? Probably, Tennant said grimly. But here's the problem, Cross. The law doesn't care about what's right for the dog. It cares about property. And if Drummond's got papers proving Blaze was his, there's not much I can do. Ethan stood, pacing. There has to be something. Tennant was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, There might be, but it's risky. I'm listening. If you can prove that Blaze was abused under Drummond's ownership, you might be able to argue that returning the dog would constitute cruelty. It's a long shot, but it's something. How do I prove that? You'd need a witness, someone who saw what Drummond did, or evidence, scars, injuries, something that shows the dog was mistreated. Ethan thought about the scars on Blaze's muzzle, the torn ear, the way the dog had flinched at every touch when Ethan first brought him home. He's covered in scars. Then document them. Get someone to testify that they saw the dog's condition when you first got him. Build a case. And if that's not enough, Tennant met his eyes. Then you're going to have to make a choice. Give up the dog or break the law. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch with Blaze beside him, watching the stars, thinking about choices and consequences. He'd spent his whole life trying to do the right thing, trying to stay out of trouble, follow the rules, keep his head down. And where had it gotten him? Alone on a failing ranch, fighting to hold on to the one thing that made his life feel like it meant something. Maybe the rules didn't matter as much as he'd thought. Maybe sometimes you had to decide what was worth fighting for, and then fight, no matter the cost. By the time the sun came up, Ethan had made his decision. Victor Drummond arrived in Copper Ridge at noon, riding in a black carriage pulled by two matched horses. He was a big man, barrel-chested, with a thick beard and cold eyes. Behind him rode 4 men, all of them armed. Ethan was waiting in the street, Blaze at his side. Tennant stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching. Drummond stepped down from the carriage and looked at Blaze. A slow smile spread across his face. There he is, Drummond said. Reaper. I've been looking for you, boy. Blaze didn't move, didn't wag his tail, didn't show any recognition at all. He just sat there, calm and still. Drummond's smile faded. Come here, Reaper. Blaze didn't move. Drummond's expression darkened. I said, come here. Ethan stepped forward. His name is Blaze, and he's not going anywhere with you. Drummond turned to face him. You Ethan Cross? I am. Then you've been informed of my claim. That dog is my property. I have documentation proving it. I don't care. Drummond's eyes narrowed. You don't care about the law? I care about what's right. And what's right is that dog staying with me. That's not your decision to make. It is now. Drummond took a step forward, and his men moved with him. Tennant stepped between them, hand resting on his pistol. That's far enough, Tennant said. Drummond looked at him. You the sheriff? I am. Then you know I have a legal right to reclaim my property. Maybe, Tennant said, but I also know you run illegal fighting rings, and I know that dog's got scars all over him from being forced to fight. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back in that carriage and leave town. And if you don't, I'm going to arrest you for animal cruelty. Drummond's face went red. You can't do that. Watch me. For a long moment, no one moved. The street was silent, the tension thick enough to cut. Then Drummond smiled, but it was a cold, ugly thing. You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll be back. With lawyers, with judges. And I'll take that dog and there won't be a damn thing you can do about it. He climbed back into the carriage, and his men followed. The carriage rolled out of town, leaving dust in its wake. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "That bought you some time," Tennant said. "But he's right. He'll be back." "I know," Ethan said. "But by then, I'll be ready." Ethan spent the next 3 days preparing for a fight he wasn't sure he could win. He rode back and forth to town, talking to anyone who'd been present when he first bought Blaze from Sal Drucker. Most people remembered the day. It wasn't often someone paid money for an animal everyone else had written off as worthless. Mrs. Haver at the general store remembered. So did the blacksmith, Garrett. Even a few of the men who'd been standing in that crowd, laughing, agreed to write down what they'd seen. "Dog was half dead," Garrett said as he scrawled his statement on a piece of paper. "Ribs showing, covered in cuts and scars. Mean as a rattlesnake because he didn't know any better." "And now?" Ethan asked. Garrett looked out the window to where Blaze was sitting calmly beside Ethan's mare. "Now he's a different animal. You did that." Ethan collected the statements and brought them to Tennant, who read through each one carefully, his expression unreadable. "This helps," Tennant said finally, "but it's not a guarantee. Drummond's got money, and money buys lawyers who know how to twist things. So what do I do?" "You keep building your case, and you pray the judge sees sense." Ethan didn't put much stock in prayer, but he kept working. He photographed Blaze's scars, the torn ear, the marks on his muzzle, the puckered skin on his shoulder where the rattlesnake had bitten him. He wrote down everything he could remember about the dog's condition when he'd first brought him home. The aggression, the fear, the way Blaze had thrown himself against the walls of that crate like he was trying to escape his own skin. And he wrote about what came after. The slow, painful process of trust. The way Blaze had learned to eat from his hand. The way the dog had thrown himself between Ethan and danger, not once but twice, without hesitation. By the time Drummond's lawyer returned a week later, Ethan had a stack of papers an inch thick. Martin Colfax arrived alone this time. No entourage, no theatrics. He dismounted outside the sheriff's office and knocked on the door. Tennant let him in, and Ethan was already there, waiting. "Mr. Cross," Colfax said, setting his briefcase on the desk. "I'm here to inform you that Mr. Drummond is prepared to take this matter to court. However, he's also willing to consider a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" Ethan asked. "Mr. Drummond will withdraw his claim in exchange for $500. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't have $500. "Then I suggest you find it, because if this goes to court, you'll lose. Mr. Drummond has documentation proving ownership. He has witnesses who saw the dog in his possession, and he has the resources to drag this out until you're bankrupt." "Or," Tennant said, leaning back in his chair, "we go to court and present evidence that Drummond abused the animal. Fighting dogs are illegal in this territory, Colfax. You know that. And if we can prove Drummond was running a fighting ring, he's the one who'll end up in handcuffs." Colfax's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." "Can you prove it?" Tennant glanced at Ethan, who pulled out the stack of papers and set them on the desk. "We can prove the dog was abused. We can prove he was half-starved and violent when Ethan bought him. And we've got witnesses who'll testify that Drummond's known for running illegal operations." Colfax picked up the papers, flipped through them, then set them back down. "This is circumstantial at best." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but it's enough to make a judge ask questions. And I don't think your client wants anyone digging too deep into his business." For a long moment, Colfax didn't respond. Then he closed his briefcase and stood. "I'll relay your position to Mr. Drummond, but I wouldn't count on this ending in your favor." He left, and the room fell silent. "You think he'll back down?" Ethan asked. "No," Tennant said, "but we rattled him, and that's something." The court date was set for 2 weeks later in the county seat, a town called Ridgefield, about 30 miles east of Copper Ridge. Ethan had never been there, but Tennant assured him it was a fair place, with a judge who didn't tolerate nonsense. "Judge Horace Winters," Tennant said. "He's tough but honest. If you've got a solid case, he'll hear you out." Ethan spent those 2 weeks working the ranch and trying not to think about what would happen if he lost. But the thoughts crept in anyway, late at night when he couldn't sleep. He imagined Drummond dragging Blaze away in chains. Imagined the dog back in a fighting pit, forced to tear into other animals for the entertainment of men who saw him as nothing more than a weapon. He couldn't let that happen. Wouldn't. The day before the hearing, Ethan rode into town to finalize everything with Tennant. Blaze came with him, as always, trotting beside the mare with his head high. People stopped to watch them pass, and Ethan noticed something he hadn't before. Respect in their eyes. Not pity, not suspicion, just respect. Word had spread about what Blaze had done, about the rattlesnake, about the wild dog, about the way he'd defended Ethan without hesitation. And people remembered. They saw the scars, but they also saw the loyalty, the courage, the proof that something broken could be made whole again. When they reached the sheriff's office, Tennant was waiting with someone Ethan didn't expect. Sal Drucker. Sal looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his hat clutched in his hands. "Ethan," he said, "Sheriff asked me to come." "Why?" "Because I'm the one who sold you the dog," Sal said, "and I need to tell you where I got him." Ethan's pulse quickened. "I'm listening." Sal glanced at Tennant, who nodded. "Go on." "I didn't steal him," Sal said. "Not exactly. I was hauling freight up near the mining camps, and I stopped at a place called Black Hollow. It's a rough spot. Gambling, drinking, fights. I saw them dragging this dog out of a pit. He'd just lost a fight, and they were going to shoot him because he wasn't worth feeding anymore." Ethan's stomach turned. "And you bought him?" "I gave the man $5 to let me take him instead. Figured I could sell him as a working dog, make a little profit. But he was too mean, too broken. So when you offered me $1, I took it." Sal looked at Ethan, his eyes tired. "I didn't know Drummond was looking for him. Didn't know the dog was stolen. I just thought I was doing a decent thing, keeping him from getting shot." "Do you remember the man you bought him from?" Tennant asked. "Yeah. Big guy. Bald, scar across his chin, called himself Dutch." Tennant wrote that down. "Dutch works for Drummond. He runs the fighting pits." Ethan looked at Sal. "You willing to testify to all this?" Sal hesitated, then nodded. "I am. I don't like Drummond, and I don't like what he does. If I can help put a stop to it, I will." "Thank you," Ethan said, and he meant it. The next morning, they rode to Ridgefield. Ethan, Tennant, Sal, and Blaze. The road was long and dusty, the sun relentless, but Ethan barely noticed. His mind was racing, running through everything they'd prepared, everything that could go wrong. Ridgefield was bigger than Copper Ridge, with brick buildings and paved streets. The courthouse sat at the center of town, a 2-story structure with tall windows and a clock tower. Ethan tied his mare outside and looked up at it, feeling small. "You ready?" Tennant asked. "No," Ethan said honestly, "but I'm here anyway." Inside, the courtroom was already filling up. Drummond was there, sitting at a table with Colfax and another man Ethan didn't recognize. Drummond saw Ethan and smiled, the same cold smile from before. Ethan ignored him and took his seat at the opposite table. Blaze lay down at his feet, calm and quiet. Judge Winters entered a few minutes later, a tall man with silver hair and a face carved from granite. He took his seat at the bench, adjusted his glasses, and looked out at the room. "This is a civil hearing regarding ownership of one dog," he said, his voice flat and no nonsense. "Mr. Drummond, you claim the animal is yours. Mr. Cross, you claim you purchased it legally and have the right to keep it. Let's hear both sides and settle this." He looked at Colfax. "You may begin." Colfax stood and launched into his argument. He presented documents showing that Drummond had purchased a dog, matching Blaze's description 2 years ago from a breeder in Kansas. He presented witness statements from men who claimed to have seen the dog in Drummond's possession. He built a case that was neat, clean, and entirely focused on property law. "The dog was stolen," Colfax concluded. "Mr. Drucker had no legal right to sell it. Therefore, Mr. Cross's purchase is void, and the animal must be returned to its rightful owner." Judge Winters made a note, then looked at Tennant. "Your turn." Tennant stood, and Ethan felt his heart hammering. This was it. "Your Honor," Tennant began, "we're not disputing that the dog was once in Mr. Drummond's possession, but we are disputing that returning the animal to Mr. Drummond is in anyone's best interest, especially the dog's." He laid out the evidence. The photographs of Blaze's scars, the statements from people who'd seen the dog's condition when Ethan first bought him, Sal's testimony about rescuing the dog from a fighting pit to save it from being shot. "This dog wasn't stolen," Tennant said. "He was rescued. And the reason he was in that condition, starved, scarred, violent, is because Mr. Drummond used him in illegal dogfighting rings. Returning him to Drummond isn't justice, it's cruelty." Drummond's face went red, and he leaned over to whisper furiously to Colfax. Judge Winters raised a hand. "Mr. Drummond, you'll have your chance to respond. Sit down." Drummond sat, glaring. Tennant called Sal to the stand. Sal told his story, how he'd found Blaze in Black Hollow, how the dog was being dragged out of a pit, how he'd paid to save him from being killed. "And the man you bought him from," Tennant said. "You said his name was Dutch?" "That's right." "Do you see him in this courtroom?" Sal looked around, then pointed. "There, sitting behind Mr. Drummond." Every head turned. The man Sal had pointed to, a big, bald man with a scar across his chin, stood up and tried to leave. Tennant nodded to a deputy who blocked the door. Judge Winters leaned forward. "Sir, sit down. You're not going anywhere." Dutch sat, looking furious. Tennant turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, this man runs fighting pits for Mr. Drummond. If you question him under oath, I believe he'll confirm that Blaze was used in illegal fights. And if that's the case, then Drummond has no legal claim to the animal. You can't own property you used to commit a crime." Colfax shot to his feet. "Objection. This is speculation." "Then let's find out," Judge Winters said. He looked at Dutch. "Come up here." Dutch walked to the stand like a man heading for the gallows. The bailiff swore him in, and Judge Winters leaned back in his chair. "State your name." "William Dutch." "Do you work for Victor Drummond?" Dutch hesitated. Sometimes." "What kind of work?" "Different things." "Do you run dogfighting pits?" Dutch's jaw worked. He glanced at Drummond, whose face had gone pale. "Answer the question," Judge Winters said. Dutch looked down. "Yeah, I run fights." A murmur went through the courtroom. "And was this dog," Judge Winters pointed at Blaze, "used in those fights?" Dutch didn't answer. "Mr. Dutch, you're under oath." "Yeah," Dutch said quietly. "He was." The courtroom erupted. Judge Winters banged his gavel. "Order, order!" Drummond was on his feet, shouting at Colfax, who was trying to salvage the situation. But there was no salvaging it. The truth was out. Judge Winters waited for the noise to die down, then looked at Drummond. "Mr. Drummond, dogfighting is illegal in this territory, and based on the testimony I've just heard, you've been operating illegal fighting rings and using this animal in them. Not only do I deny your claim to ownership, I'm also referring this matter to the Territorial Marshal for criminal investigation." Drummond's face went from red to white. "Your Honor." "We're done here," Judge Winters said. He turned to Ethan. "Mr. Cross, the dog is yours. Take him home." Ethan felt like he couldn't breathe. He looked down at Blaze, who was staring up at him, tail wagging slowly. "Thank you, Your Honor," Ethan managed. Judge Winters banged the gavel. Court adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Ethan stood in the sunlight with Blaze at his side, feeling like he'd just walked out of a dream. Tennant clapped him on the shoulder. "You did it," Tennant said. "He's yours. For good." "We did it," Ethan corrected. He looked at Sal. "Couldn't have done it without you." Sal shrugged, but he was smiling. "Least I could do. That dog deserved better." They rode back to Copper Ridge together, and when they arrived, word had already spread. People came out of their homes and businesses, lining the street, watching as Ethan rode through town with Blaze at his side. No one said anything. They just watched. And in their eyes, Ethan saw something he hadn't expected. Approval. Respect. Maybe even a little bit of pride. He'd won. Not just in court, but in the eyes of the people who'd once looked at Blaze and seen only danger. When they reached the ranch, Ethan dismounted and looked out at the valley. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and orange. The barn roof was finished. The fences were mended. The land looked almost like it had potential again. Blaze sat beside him, calm and content. "You know what I think?" Ethan said quietly. "I think we both got a second chance, and we didn't waste it." Blaze's tail thumped against the ground. Ethan crouched down and scratched behind the dog's ears. "You're home now, for real. No one's taking you away." Blaze leaned into him, and Ethan wrapped his arms around the dog, holding him close. For a long time, they just sat there, man and dog, watching the sun go down over a land that had tried to break them both and failed. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Ethan worked the ranch, and Blaze worked alongside him, learning to herd the few cattle Ethan managed to buy with money he'd saved. The dog was good at it, patient, focused, never using more force than necessary. It was like he understood that there was a difference between fighting and working, between survival and living. One afternoon, Ethan was fixing the gate to the corral when he heard a wagon coming up the road. He straightened, shading his eyes against the sun, and saw Tennant driving a small cart with someone sitting beside him. A woman. Young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair tied back and a dress that looked too nice for ranch country. Tennant pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. "Ethan, got someone here who wanted to meet you." The woman stepped down, and Ethan noticed she was carrying a notebook. "Mr. Cross," she said, extending a hand. "My name is Sarah Brennan. I'm a reporter for the Ridgefield Gazette." Ethan shook her hand, confused. "A reporter?" "That's right. I was at the courthouse the day of your hearing. I've been following the story. About you and your dog. About what happened with Drummond." She smiled. "It's a remarkable story, Mr. Cross. People want to hear it." "I'm not sure there's much to tell," Ethan said. "I disagree." Sarah pulled out her notebook. "You took an animal everyone said was beyond saving and proved them wrong. You stood up to a powerful man who was breaking the law, and you won. That's exactly the kind of story people need to hear." Ethan glanced at Tennant, who shrugged. "She's persistent. Figured I'd bring her out here, let you decide if you want to talk." Ethan looked at Blaze, who was sitting on the porch, watching. Then he looked back at Sarah. "All right, but I'm not the hero here. Blaze is." Sarah's smile widened. "Then let's start with him." They sat on the porch, and Ethan told her the whole story. How he'd bought Blaze for $1. How the dog had been vicious and terrified. How it had taken weeks of patience to earn even a sliver of trust. He told her about the rattlesnake, about the storm, about the wild dog. And he told her about the hearing, about Drummond, about the moment Judge Winters had ruled in their favor. Sarah wrote it all down, her pen moving fast across the page. When Ethan finished, she looked up. "What do you think changed him? What made the difference?" Ethan thought about that. "I think he just needed someone to show him that not everyone was going to hurt him, that there was another way to live." He paused. "Same as any of us, really." Sarah wrote that down too. Then she looked at Blaze. "May I?" "Go ahead." She approached slowly, hand extended. Blaze sniffed it, then licked her fingers. Sarah laughed, a bright sound that echoed across the valley. "He's wonderful." "He is," Ethan said. Sarah stayed for another hour asking questions, taking notes. When she finally left, she promised to send Ethan a copy of the article when it was published. "I think this story is going to reach a lot of people," she said, "and maybe it'll change some minds about what's possible." The article came out 2 weeks later. Tennant brought a copy to the ranch, and Ethan read it on the porch while Blaze slept at his feet. It was a good article, fair, honest. It told the story without making Ethan out to be more than he was. Just a man who'd taken a chance on something broken and refused to give up when things got hard. But the last paragraph stuck with him. In a world that often feels divided between those who are kind and those who are cruel, Ethan Cross and his dog Blaze remind us that transformation is possible. That patience, courage, and understanding can rewrite even the harshest fate. And that sometimes the act of saving another is also the act of saving ourselves. Ethan folded the paper and set it aside. He looked out at the valley, at the land he'd fought to keep, and at the dog who'd fought just as hard to stay. "We made it," he said quietly. "Against all odds, we made it." Blaze's tail thumped once, and Ethan smiled. The months turned. Fall came, then winter, then spring again. The ranch grew slowly, but it grew. More cattle, better crops, a new roof on the house. And through it all, Blaze was there, steady and constant. People in town started asking Ethan for advice when their own dogs acted out. They brought him animals that were scared or aggressive, hoping he could work the same magic he'd worked with Blaze. Ethan didn't think of it as magic. He thought of it as patience, as understanding, as recognizing that beneath the fear and the anger, there was always something worth saving. One spring morning, Ethan was working in the barn when Blaze started barking. Not the warning bark he used for coyotes. Something different, excited. Ethan stepped outside and saw a wagon coming up the road. When it got closer, he recognized the driver, Garrett from the blacksmith shop. And sitting beside him was a boy, maybe 12 years old, with a crate in his lap. Garrett pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. "Ethan, hope you don't mind the visit." "Not at all. What brings you out here?" Garrett gestured to the boy. "This is my nephew, Jacob. He's got a problem, and I told him you might be able to help." Jacob climbed down from the wagon, struggling with the crate. Inside was a puppy, small, scruffy, with wild eyes and bared teeth. It was snarling, snapping at the wood, throwing itself against the walls. Ethan's chest tightened. He knew that look, that desperation. "Found him on the side of the road," Jacob said. "He was all alone, and I thought I could help him, but he won't let me near him. My pa says I should just let him go, but I don't want to. I think he can be good. I think he just needs, I don't know, time." Ethan looked at the puppy, then at Jacob. The boy's eyes were hopeful, pleading. "You're right," Ethan said. "He does need time and patience and someone who won't give up on him. Can you help?" Ethan crouched down beside the crate. The puppy snarled, but Ethan didn't flinch. He just sat there, calm, letting the animal see that he wasn't a threat. After a moment, the snarling quieted. "I can help," Ethan said, "but here's the thing. You have to help too. This isn't something I can do for you. You have to be the one who earns his trust." Jacob nodded eagerly. "I will. I promise." Ethan stood and looked at Garrett. "Leave him here for a few days. Let me work with him, show Jacob what to do. Then Jacob can take him home and keep going." Garrett smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." They left the crate on the porch, and after they drove away, Ethan opened it carefully. The puppy didn't bolt. He just pressed himself into the corner, trembling. Blaze walked over, calm and steady, and sat down a few feet away. He didn't approach, didn't crowd, just sat there, a silent presence. The puppy's eyes flicked to Blaze, then to Ethan. "It's okay," Ethan said quietly. "You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." The puppy didn't move, but his trembling slowed. Ethan filled a bowl with water and set it near the crate. Then he sat down on the porch steps, Blaze beside him, and waited. The sun climbed higher. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods. And slowly, carefully, the puppy crept forward and drank. Ethan watched, and he thought about the day he'd bought Blaze for a single coin, about how impossible it had seemed, how many people had told him he was wasting his time. But he hadn't been. Because here they were, alive, together, proof that broken things could heal if someone cared enough to try. The puppy finished drinking and retreated to the crate. But this time, he didn't snarl. He just watched, wary but curious. Ethan smiled. "One day at a time," he said. "That's all it takes." Blaze leaned against him, warm and solid, and Ethan rested a hand on the dog's head. They'd survived the storms, literal and otherwise. They'd faced down cruelty and fear and people who wanted to tear them apart. And they'd come through it, not unscathed, but whole. In a land that didn't offer much mercy, they'd found their own, built it from scratch, piece by piece, scar by scar. And that, Ethan thought, was enough. More than enough. As the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, man and dog sat together on the porch, watching the world turn. The wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain, and somewhere in the scrubland, a hawk cried out. Ethan closed his eyes and breathed it in, all of it, the land, the silence, the peace. Blaze's head rested against his knee, and Ethan felt the steady rise and fall of the dog's breathing. "We did good," Ethan said quietly. "You and me." We did real good. And in the fading light, with the stars beginning to show overhead, they stayed there, two survivors who'd found their way home at last.